I come from Finland, and therefore I have an option for you. We can either run this session in Finnish or in English. It's your call. There are quite a number of Finns here, but I guess we do this in English, and I had to apologize in advance if there are any difficulties in understanding what I am saying or my Finnish colleagues are saying. It's probably because of this language issue. But you're all warmly welcome here, and as a chair, I try to keep this 90 minutes that we have interactive, so that you will have opportunities to participate. The first opportunity will come in a moment, and the question we will be exploring during this next 90 minutes is, what does the new social contract mean for teachers and teaching? As you know, the report that is titled Reimagining Our Futures Together, a new social contract for education, calls for a new social contract for education. And it emphasizes that teachers must be at the center, and that the teaching profession needs to be reimagined as a collaborative endeavor which inspires educational and social transformation. Now, just to be sure, because I can see when I look around the room that not necessarily everyone is a native English speaker, or you may not be fully aware of this report, that we are talking about the same issues during this afternoon. So let me ask you to think, and this is my first little activity for you, about the two key terms that are linked to this session. And these two key terms are social contract and transforming education. We hear about those things a lot during these days here, and we have heard about those things a lot during the ongoing pandemic. But what do these terms mean to you? And I have a habit often when it comes to complicated concepts or words to ask the same question by asking you, how would you explain these terms to a 10-year-old? Because, you know, if we are not clear about what we are talking about, this next 90 minutes doesn't matter too much. So regardless of what your answer is, and if we had more time here, we would first of all have a conversation about these things. But the social contract, and I'm referring to mostly of the work in this fantastic report, it can be seen as a mutual agreement among members of a society, or in this case, a global community, in order to better cooperate for shared benefits in the future. It is more than a deal or agreement imposed by some, or a plain administrative transaction, because social contracts reflect shared values, norms, principles, and promises that are both formally legislated, but also culturally accepted. Now, the transformation is a little bit trickier word, because it often means working together to create or reimagine something new, or futures that are shared and interdependent. Transforming education is not the same as reforming education, that we have all of us heard a lot before, because transforming education requires working on change collaboratively. This is exactly what we are doing here, both preserving the best of the past and co-creating something new. Transforming education, therefore, requires answering the following: what should we stop doing? What should we continue to do? And what needs to be creatively invented afresh? So these are the key questions here. Let's start this conversation now. And I would first like to invite Elisa Guerra, sitting here next to me, and I was looking at your CV, and it's so long that it would take half of the session here, but I just want to keep it short and mention that you served as a member of the International Commission on the Futures of Education report that was just mentioned. You also are awarded teacher in Latin America, and you also are on the top 10 of the Global Teacher Prize. So many awards, and I guess that there would be very few better person to start this conversation than Elisa, and could I ask you to talk us a little bit about what the report says about the conditions necessary to support teachers to transform education. And I also have to make a note here that Elisa, unfortunately, you have to leave soon after your remarks. So let's take the best out of this time that you have with us. Thanks for coming, and floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Pasi, and good afternoon, everyone. Well, this is an oat flake. It's tiny, so maybe not all of you can see it, but it doesn't matter. You know what it looks like. Maybe you even had it for breakfast. This little oat flake is very similar in size and in shape to the seed that gives life to the sequoia, probably the most massive trees on Earth. I am here today as a member of the Commission on the Futures of Education and as a teacher to speak to you about our new report, Reimagining Our Futures Together, a new social contract for education. Isn't it amazing that something so little can become so gigantic, like a sequoia? Anyway, I would like to focus my remarks on the second part of the report, which speak about pedagogies, curriculums, schools, and what brings us together today, which are teachers. So, as the subtitle of the report states, and as Pasi was saying, a new social contract for education. That is what we are proposing with this report. And in this context, what does a social contract for education mean? Well, it is a set of expectations that schools and families and communities and society have one of another. Kind of like I, the family, present to you, the school, my children, and I expect you to educate them today and for the future. And we, the school, embrace your children, families, and we expect from you and for the rest of the society at large to also do your share in the social contract, to do your share in raising them and supporting us, or something like that. Now, what do you think are these expectations that we have today for education? And what of the things that we do, as Pasi was saying, what of the things that we do we need to keep doing? What of the things that we do we should better let go? And which things we need to reinvent afresh? Now, let me say that our school systems today are still guided by a social contract for education that is 150 years ago old, more or less. And it guides education under 5 principles that the Commission humbly asks you to rethink. And these 5 principles are, first, from a pedagogical point of view, teachers, they present lessons to a group of students in a classroom setting. Now, you could say that because students are receiving these lessons in a group, it means that they are learning together, right? Well, we argue that our school systems still privilege individual accomplishments. So they might be sitting next to each other, just like we are right now, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they are learning together. Second, curriculum. we have organized our curriculums as a grid of subjects. And what we have done is literally we have compartmentalized knowledge and skills. Third, just as students are learning in their very own pathways, well, teachers, we are as well teaching in isolation. Teaching is still a very lonely profession. I might be teaching very close to the teacher that is in the next classroom, but there is a wall, there is this thick wall between us, and we never really come together. Which brings us to 4, the architecture of schools, the way that schools are organized. Think about this. Think about the schools in the world. Regardless of context, they are very similar to each other in their ways, in how they are built, the anatomy of the school. You see, you know where the classrooms are. There are some spaces, common spaces where very specific uses. We also organize our learning in very specific ways. We live by the tyranny of the bell or the tyranny of the textbook or both. And the problem, colleagues, with this, shall we say, egg-crate model of a school is that it's very limiting. It limits the many ways that we could teach and learn in our schools. And well, that's of course how we organize the schools and learning, but then it's number 5, and it relates also to schools. Schools are designed to somehow remove youth and young people and children from their families and their communities. And look what we do with them. We sort them by age. We place them in a classroom, in this kind of school bubble, right? And then we decide what they need to learn. We teach it to them. And when we decide that they are done, we pop the bubble, we release them to society, and we hope for the best. And we're done. That's what we do. Now, we have at the Commission some proposals that we would like to present to you. I am going to outline just a few. So we propose pedagogies of cooperation and solidarity. What do these pedagogies look like? Well, they are rooted in human rights. They are, of course, they follow the principles for non-discrimination and respect for diversity. They are problem-posing and participative, as opposed to passive and individualistic. And these pedagogies also take into account that our futures are interconnected and are interdependent. And so these pedagogies are intercultural, intergenerational, and interdisciplinary. We also recognize the importance of our students becoming global citizens, and ourselves, of course, as teachers and people. And we think that service learning and community engagement are great steps in the right direction. That's about pedagogies. Now, we could also talk about curriculums. Let's think what we need to learn, but also what we need to unlearn. We need, of course, to acquire knowledge. But, and by the way, throughout the report, if you read it, you will see that we refer to knowledge as a global common good. But okay, we need to acquire knowledge, but knowledge is never complete, it's never done. We need to acquire knowledge, but we also need to co-create knowledge. And what are the things that we believe our curriculums should embrace? Well, of course, foundational skills, because, even before the pandemic, we had and we still have a ravaging learning crisis. So foundational skills, but also we need to learn how to live in a damaged planet. We need to learn how to care and heal this damaged planet. We need to learn how to take care of each other, how to take care of ourselves physically, emotionally, in many ways. We need to know how to take care about each other. And I mean, this is just the tip of the iceberg. We could think about here plurilingualism, strengthening of the humanities, scientific literacy, active participation. It is a very long list, and it's a lot to ask from teachers. But there's just no reimagining of curriculums and pedagogy without the presence of teachers, which brings us again to teachers. Do you remember when we were saying that teachers are teaching in isolation? Well, if we want to build the futures of education that we envision, and I say futures in the plural, like the report states, well, we need then enriching and nurturing and collaborative teaching communities. And we also need agency, autonomy, and support. And we need to feel safe in our classrooms. And I can't stress this enough, so I am going to say it again. We need to feel safe in our classrooms. We need to be safe in our classrooms. This idea of the teacher as a superhero or a superhuman may be very well-meaning, but it puts insurmountable pressure on us, and it leads many to leave the profession. Now, collaboration, teaching collaboration, it's not going to be, coming just like magic. And of course, there's also the problem that you very well know, that the teaching profession is still under-recognized, underappreciated, under-supported, oh boy, that's a lot of unders, don't you think? Okay, so we now can think about schools. We, of the many lessons that we can derive from the pandemic, we know now that schools and teachers, of course, are irreplaceable. If schools did not exist, we will need to invent them. And this is not to say that the actual grammar of school is not without its challenges. It has challenges. It has many, many challenges, but we still need to protect and transform our schools. We need to think of the school not as a place of knowledge transmission, but as a place of learning through exploration and participation. And we need to make those thick walls more open to the community, connect these classrooms to the world. And please don't think for a minute that I am saying that because learning happens everywhere, well, then schools melt and dissolve or disappear into the world. No. Because schools are these places for intentional pedagogical encounters, and no other spaces can have the same potential for human flourishing and transformation. Of course, we need to reform the schools, and of course, we need to protect the schools, and there is a lot of work that we need to do. Let's think about our schools like part of a larger learning ecosystems that are comprised of built spaces, natural spaces, and also digital spaces, of course. Let's rethink schools as these sustainable places that can give everyone the kind of experiences that you cannot find anywhere else. And let's rebuild our schools so they promote and allow for movement and interaction. Because think about this. Learning is many times messy, noisy, and disruptive. And expecting children or anyone at any age, for that sake, to sit immobile, in silence, staring at the front of the classroom, at the blackboard, in, I don't know, sublime adoration, as if it was a shrine. I'm sorry, it's not only irrational, it's also counterproductive. And if we go back to the sequoias, If you have ever been in a redwood forest, if you have ever embraced a sequoia, maybe you have asked yourself, as I did, I bet these magnificent trees have very deep roots so they can stay upright. And I was surprised to learn that no, actually they have not very deep roots, but what they do have is wide roots. And these roots extend and touch the roots of the neighboring sequoia trees. I like to think of this as if they were holding hands underneath. And that's what allows them to stay tall. They can stay tall because they stand together. Don't you think that maybe we could become a tribe of giants like the sequoias? Maybe we could, if we could be like them, light and humble and willing to stay together. Every child bears the seed of genius within, and every child deserves the chance, a fighting chance, to fulfill his or her own potential. Yes, we need to protect and transform our schools, but there's some good news. As hard as this may sound, there are some good news here. Schools are a social invention. If we imagine them once, yes, of course we can do it again. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Elisa. I don't know about you people, but I could listen to her a long time about these wisdoms. And before we let you go, Elisa, I cannot hold myself from asking this question from you. And you can think about this as somebody who is a 10-year-old, 12-year-old turning to you and look into your eyes and say that, Elisa, what makes one of the best teachers in the world like you? If I want to be just one or two sentences, what's your advice to really become a good teacher?
Oh my God, I will say never stop learning, because you know, learning makes you grow, teaching makes you great, but when you learn, you can be great when you teach. And I think that just is being passionate and curious about the world.
So you're saying that you can learn to be a teacher. You don't have to born to be a teacher, right?
Oh no, I mean, you're always learning. Knowledge is never done, teaching is never done either. You always can evolve to be a better teacher. We all can evolve to be a better whatever we are.
That's right. Thank you so much, Elisa, and have a wonderful summit. Thanks for coming here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Join me once again. Thank you, Elisa.
Thank you.
Now, what you see here next to me is a hot seat. So if anybody wants to join the panel, here's the seat for you. But, you know, I had this amazing privilege this afternoon to sit here with the wonderful people around the world. I have two ministers. I have Li Andersson from Finland, Minister of Education, and I have Jaime Persuk from Argentina, Buenos Aires. So two ministers here this afternoon, and then two wonderful education colleagues and experts. I have Rebecca Telford from the UNHCR, Chief of Education, and where do I have Haldis Host, Deputy Secretary General of Education International, right? Okay, so this is what we have, but here is a hot seat, so come and join me if you want to, if you have something to really that you want to say joining this. Now, I would like to propose that we go in this order, the ministers first, and I would like to ask Lee to open this this conversation here, and I would like to ask you and the other colleagues here to make some opening remarks on how do we create conditions to support teachers in this transforming education. And I have another question for you. So this is open-ended. You can speak your heart and whatever you think is important for this conversation. Then I have another brief question for you. If you can keep this within 5 to 7 minutes, that would be great. So we have time for other people to join us as well. But Lee, can I ask you to take the floor first?
Thank you very much, Pasi, and thank you also for the organizers for convening this discussion. And I have to say that after the previous speaker, I already feel like a boring politician, and I haven't even started to speak yet, but I will try to do my best in 5 to 7 minutes. But I'm very happy that we are having a discussion focusing on how we can support conditions for teachers, precisely because teachers are not superheroes, as we heard, and it's our responsibility also to make sure that teachers have the conditions that they need, the competences, the tools that they need for their work and for transforming education. And because we know that teachers are at the heart when you talk about quality in education, we also hope that investing in teachers will be one of the key messages in the Heads of State Summit in September. But a few points regarding well-being of teachers, about right resources, about recognition as professionals, professional development, and then one point around collaboration. Firstly, if we talk about well-being of teachers and securing the right conditions for teachers, of course, I think we have to start with the basics, having the right resources for education. If we have too big groups in our classrooms, if we have bad infrastructures, if we have lacks in our education material, of course, we cannot really talk about well-being of our educators. But on top of this, and on top of appropriate salaries and working conditions and so on, I think especially now in a post-COVID society, increasingly when I talk about with teachers in my home country, they are talking to me about this feeling that they are not only educated professionals in pedagogics, but they feel that they also have to be youth workers, social workers, psychologists, and so on. So making sure that we have a sufficient amount of other staff, supportive staff and other professionals working together with our teachers in our schools, such as special needs teachers, psychologists, other professionals, is very important because it enables us to make sure that teachers can focus on what they are the best at, which is teaching. Which brings me to my other point in terms of teacher well-being. We think it's also very important that we recognize teachers as professionals, talk about them as professionals and work with them as professionals when it comes to teaching. Making sure that they have autonomy and power to affect their own work and their own working environment, working within their own schools, but also making sure that we involve teachers in educational policy on a national level. For example, in Finland, I could say that the teachers' trade union is the single most important partner when we do educational policy and educational laws. And they are also involved in the design of national and local curricula, which of course is also very important for us to make sure that the national and local curricula are implemented. On top of this, as we heard from the previous speaker, she said that a good teacher is a teacher that never stops learning. And we also need to have the right kind of mechanism and structures in place to support teachers in their lifelong learning and professional development. With everything happening in the world is changing very quickly. If we want education to be transformative and to transform our education system, of course, we also need to make sure that teachers have possibilities to participate in continuous professional development, which also, of course, contributes to well-being in the job, feeling that you have the tools and equipment, the skills that you need to do your work and to develop what you do. We have recently revised our national policy on teachers' continuous professional development. And this process was also all about collaboration, as the policy was done in collaboration in a forum where stakeholders from universities to teachers' unions, education providers, and experts all took part in our National Teachers Education Forum. And through this, we also want to keep the teachers involved, but also take into account the research that is made in universities and so on. So we also have a research-based continuous professional development policy for our teachers. Last point, also on collaboration, as I said, collaborating with teachers, acknowledging their professionalism is very important. But if we look at everything happening in society, which also, of course, affects the work in schools and teaching, multiple sustainability crises, climate, biodiversity crisis, this also demands that our teachers are able to do phenomenon-based approaches in their learning. So not only collaborating with other teachers, which is everybody is increasingly doing, but also collaborating with other stakeholders and other actors in society. So looking outside the school, thinking about how we can collaborate with different actors in addressing these issues in teaching. Those were my introductory remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lee, for a very clear statement, and also respecting the time limit, which is a good thing. So, Minister Jaime Persuk from Argentina, I understand that you will speak Spanish. Yeah, so he will speak Spanish, and so this is a little test for your foreign language skills, unless you're a Spanish speaker. and then we will have Carlos Vargas Tames over here from UNESCO, and so he will give, for those who struggle like myself in understanding everything, a summary of what the minister will speak. But the floor is yours.
Bueno, buenas tardes. Gracias a PAL y UNESCO y a todos los que están aquí, que vinieron a discutir, a escuchar, a conocer nuestra perspectiva, y nosotros a escuchar las perspectivas y las opiniones y las experiencias de otros.
I think that was rather obvious, but Minister Perchik is thanking everybody for their participation, for their attendance, and that he's ready to share some of the perspectives and begin the conversation. So,
nosotros queremos contar nuestra realidad, que es particular y que involucra en una parte de nuestra sociedad a lo que se venía diciendo acá. En general es una perspectiva latinoamericana y del Caribe, es lo que hemos acordado en nuestra región, en América Latina y el Caribe. ¿Qué nos ha pasado a la salida de la pandemia? ¿Qué es lo que hemos visto? ¿Qué es lo que hemos demostrado en nuestra evaluación? Si dividimos en general, hemos retrocedido en lengua, muchísimo, y hemos tenido resultados de aprendizaje similares en matemáticas. Eso es lo que nos ha pasado en general, y es una descripción que uno podría decir, bueno, a esa sociedad le pasó eso. Y nosotros lo queremos discutir y contar. ¿Qué diferencia tenemos con eso? Cuando dividimos a nuestra sociedad en terciles o en cuartiles, al cuartil 4 ha retrocedido, pero muy poquito. El cuartil 2 y 3 se han mantenido estables en sus aprendizajes. Y el que ha perdido muchísimo aprendizaje es el cuartil 1, o sea, los más pobres de nuestra sociedad, que han perdido de dos maneras. Han aprendido menos, y son los que se han ido de la escuela también. O sea, han tenido una doble pérdida. Por un lado, se han ido de la escuela, y por otro lado, han retrocedido muchísimo en lengua, que es la disciplina de la integración social, fundamentalmente.
So the minister is relating a perspective which is very specific to Argentina, but also to Latin America and the Caribbean. And he wants to refer to the changes that took place after the COVID pandemic, particularly when it comes to learning losses and to how there were detrimental effects to the crisis, particularly in terms of reading and writing, not so much in terms of mathematics, but when one analyzes the learning losses among the different social groups, it is those in the poorest quintiles that actually end up losing in two ways. On the one hand, they're learning losses in terms of the content that was not covered, the learning that was lost, but also in terms of school disengagement and dropout. These are the people who are the most likely and who are actually leaving education.
Hay muchas explicaciones. La caracterización que hemos hecho en América Latina es la desigualdad, es la descripción fundamental de nuestras sociedades, ¿no? La desigualdad, la diferencia entre los más ricos y los más pobres, que además la pandemia la incrementó, la multiplicó, esa diferencia, esa desigualdad. Por lo tanto, absolutamente necesario pensar un nuevo contrato, es absolutamente necesario. Ahora, lo que nosotros queremos discutir es que necesariamente ese contrato tiene que ser mejor. No puede ser reponer un viejo contrato que ya mostraba diferencias y desigualdades, que esa es la marca de nuestra sociedad, sino que tiene que ser un contrato nuevo, que sea mejor y que sea para todos.
And so in face of inequality, which is a constant in Latin America and the Caribbean, is a common trait of Latin American societies, a new social contract for education is needed, but fundamentally one that is different from the present and from the past social contracts that there have been, because they have not responded to this inequality, nor they have helped in narrowing the gaps. So it needs to be a better contract. It has to be a better contract that addresses inequalities.
Por tanto, es un contrato que debe abarcar a las familias, a los estudiantes, debe abarcar a los trabajadores de la educación, los docentes y sus organizaciones, y debe abrazar fundamentalmente a los más pobres, a los más desiguales de nuestra sociedad. Recién decíamos en la otra mesa, ¿no? Muchas veces nos llenamos la boca hablando y pronunciando la palabra derechos. Rights. Cada vez que decimos la palabra right, nosotros la debemos asociar a budget, a presupuesto, a financiamiento. A un financiamiento que además debe ser suficiente, debe ser continuo, y debe funcionar como mecanismo de redistribución. La educación lo es. Y ese es el problema que tienen nuestras sociedades, ¿no? El financiamiento no es suficiente, no es continuo, y termina no funcionando como mecanismo redistributivo, sino que se termina concentrando. Entonces, la palabra derecho debe garantizar, primero, que esos derechos sean universales, que sean para todos, que sean para todas. Esa es una primera condición que en nuestras sociedades no se cumple. La segunda es que debe estar financiado, que debe estar incluido en el presupuesto. Y debe estar incluido continuamente y durante mucho tiempo. Y debe estar no atado a determinados condicionamientos que tienen nuestras sociedades. Deuda externa, servicios. Debe incluir redes de protección, la escuela lo es, pero debe incluir todas las redes de protección que garanticen los derechos, sobre todo de aquellos que no lo tienen asegurado. Y debe ser posible de ejercerlo, debe ser efectivo, si no, no es un derecho. Entonces, aquí nos llenamos textos, palabras, la palabra right, derecho, y debemos garantizarlo. Eso es una cuestión efectiva que debe estar garantizada para todos y para todas.
So the minister refers to a new social contract that is comprehensive and that actually includes families, students, teachers and their organizations and other stakeholders. The idea is for this social contract to be geared towards the poor, the most disadvantaged, in a rights framework. And here, the minister emphasizes the issue of rights beyond the rhetoric, So a right that is actually an entitlement, that is budgeted, and which redistributes wealth, which is one of the end goals of education. So when we talk about rights, we talk about new social contract, we're talking about education as a redistribution mechanism. And as such, one that helps narrow inequalities and not exacerbate them as we see that today. So going beyond the rhetoric, a discourse of rights means that they are universal, that a right, in this case to education, is universal, it is for all, but it is also financed. It is also sustainable in time, and it is non-conditional. That's to say, without, for example, conditionality in terms of debt, in terms of services, and that there are social platforms that need to be put in place to go beyond the rhetoric of the right and to have rights actually as exercised as entitlements.
Lo repito, financiamiento público, presupuesto público, creo que está dicho, public budget. La segunda propuesta que traemos de América Latina y el Caribe es poner en el centro de las discusiones a nuestros niños y a nuestros jóvenes, ¿no? Cuando hablamos de educación, en el nuevo contrato, los niños y los jóvenes en el centro de las discusiones. ¿Qué niños y qué jóvenes? Todos. Nuestra región no ha llegado a que todos sus chicos, todos sus niños, todas sus niñas, todos sus jóvenes vayan a la escuela. Por tanto, no son sujetos de estas discusiones. Los que están afuera no son parte de estas discusiones, si no aseguramos ponerlos en el medio y garantizar su derecho a la educación. Y aparece ahí otro problema, o otra discusión, o otro debate, que son en ese nuevo contrato los derechos de los trabajadores de la educación. ¿Por qué? Porque los trabajadores de la educación, las trabajadoras de la educación, son trabajadores de un derecho que tienen otros. Por tanto, los trabajadores tienen derechos. Ahora, su trabajo es proteger el derecho de otros, que en sociedades tan desiguales como las nuestras son más débiles. Por tanto, están primero, están priorizados, están en el centro de nuestras discusiones y de nuestros debates.
And so a second proposal has to do with the fact that a new social contract for education should have children and youth at the center, whom are not usually consulted. So the issue is to invite children and youth to the debate at the table, as well as teachers. Here, the debate becomes one in terms of the rights also of education workers. So education workers, teachers, and the teaching profession understood as those who enable the rights of others. And that's why they should be prioritized. That's why they should be one of the priorities in this social contract.
Ubicados los chicos, los jóvenes, en el centro de las discusiones y ubicados los trabajadores como sujetos de derechos, por ser protectores de otros derechos, como decía Lee, nosotros creemos que la política educativa se discute con los trabajadores. No es sin los trabajadores, no es contra los trabajadores, sino que se discute con los trabajadores, son sujetos de la discusión de la política educativa.
So finally, to say that indeed it is with the youth and with children at the center of the debates, at the center of the discussion, as mentioned also by Minister Anderson, the educational debates, the educational decision-making, education policy is made with the workers, in this case, with education workers.
Para cerrar esta parte, esa discusión que es conceptual, ¿no? El presupuesto, the budget, ¿no? Se traduce en cuestiones concretas. Es una discusión de política pública, es una discusión conceptual pero se traduce en cuestiones concretas, se traduce en becas, se traduce en salario de los maestros, de los docentes, se traduce en condiciones de trabajo, se traduce en escuelas, se traduce en libros, se traduce en computadoras, se traduce en educación tecnológica. Ese financiamiento, que es una discusión que aquí la damos de manera conceptual, y que nosotros vamos a solicitar a nuestro presidente la discusión y el debate público en relación a eso, se traduce en nuestra realidad en cuestiones concretas, ¿no? En mejorar los salarios de nuestros docentes, en mejorar la cantidad y la calidad de las becas de nuestros chicos y de nuestros jóvenes, en las posibilidades de más capacitación para nuestros docentes, en libros, en computadoras, en más escuelas, en más universidades. Y creemos que ahí hay una de las piedras angulares para reducir la desigualdad en la que viven los países de América Latina y el Caribe, en particular el nuestro.
And finally, to say that this conceptual discussion about inequality and about the role that education plays within it is not only conceptual, but it has to be translated into public policy. The translation of this conceptual discussion means that there are better wages and better salaries, decent working conditions for teachers, that they are improved, but also that there are schools that they're studying materials, and that there's more and better teacher development. So these are some of the key translation of this debate of education as a right and of a new social contract.
Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias. Thank you very much for this. I have a question for you about the comprehensive new social contract, but let's take this a little bit later. Rebecca, can I turn to you now and ask your comments to this conversation, please?
Sure. Thank you very much. I think it's clear from what's been said so far, across the whole summit, that teachers are at the heart of the learning process. We're not going to be able to transform anything in education or in children's lives without engaging with teachers. The Reimagining Education brief on the new social contract is really explicit about this, and it talks about a number of different aspects around how to have teachers at the heart of that transformation. But I think, to be blunt, creating conditions for teachers to play this role is going to take really concerted effort. It's going to take resources globally, but it's also going to take for us to reimagine a world in which refugees and refugee teachers are people with agency and who matter and who are respected and engaged enough to be part of this collective transformation and our collective goals. I think at a really basic level, and I think Lee talked about this as well, teachers, like all workers, like everybody really, need some basic conditions to be met, right? They need adequate remuneration. They need to be paid properly for the work that they do, paid on time, and paid regularly. And in lots of settings which are low resource, and in lots of refugee settings, that's really not guaranteed. They need access to training, but to have that training recognized and formed into career pathways. They need to be treated with respect. And they need the ability to work in safety. And I think Elisa also referred to this, but the growing number of attacks on schools is something that we should be incredibly concerned about. So they need those basics first. I was in Kakuma refugee camp in Kenya a couple of weeks ago, having a very existentialist conversation about teacher well-being, and asked one of the teachers, what does well-being mean to you? And he said, honestly, it means lunch. I'm hungry. I don't want to teach this afternoon. It just means lunch. And so thinking about the basics before we think about the existentials, I think, is really important. In refugee settings, as in others, teachers form a critical mass of the education workforce, and it's obvious, that they lead the learning process and the educational attainment of the children that they support.
but there are massive teacher shortages. I mean, we recognize this globally, and they're really exacerbated in situations of conflict, in situations of crisis, and situations of displacement. And we've now reached 100 million people displaced. So they're not small numbers of people, massive communities globally. Refugees are also very often hosted in under-resourced places. 85% of all refugees are in lower and middle income countries. And so they're countries that already have shortages. And so looking at how we can, share that responsibility and make it so that people are supported is really critical. There's lots of critical roles that teachers play in refugee settings and in crisis settings in general, right? I mean, teachers overall are a statement of continuity, they're normality for children. But in these settings, they're also providing protection support. They're also looking at putting in place a sense of stability and confidence that maybe children haven't had very much previously in their lives. They're expected to be, as you're saying, multiple things: social workers, people looking at mental health and psychosocial support, translators, interpreters, core community pillars. I think we collectively expect more and more from teachers, whilst not guaranteeing them any of the basics that I was referring to. I mean, during COVID, we saw teachers became health monitors, including in refugee camps. They were the people sharing information and making sure that everybody was kind of following protocol. And they were also having to work out how to deliver lessons with zero additional resources in most cases, and to children who'd already been traumatized and who are now stuck at home. I think one of my core messages around, creating these conditions is also about looking at the systems and the structures which are in place. So teachers and educators in refugee settings are often not included in the national system. They're often paid outside of that system, trained outside of that system. It means they don't have access to the pathways, to the training, to the opportunities, and so on, including resources that other teachers have. And I think one of the things that we've been saying throughout the preparation for the summit is so much of the work we do here focuses on national systems, which is absolutely right and proper. But when we look at refugee populations who fall outside of those systems, we have to make sure that there are mechanisms so that those teachers and then those students can benefit from the transformational pathways that we're putting in place. Qualifications, I think, is a serious issue. I mean, there's lots of places where prior teaching qualifications aren't recognized. We do see places where, teachers flee to another country, their qualifications aren't recognized. They then have to get additional qualifications from that country, and then they might move on to a third country or be resettled, and then their qualifications aren't recognized there either. So they have to train 3 times, and that's aside from, language support. And so on. And I think this lack of harmonized recognition and support really has negative implications on children's schooling, but it also has negative implications for the community. I mean, teachers, very often are a kind of backbone of the kind of jobs that people have, and some of the people who are the most respected and the most relied upon in a community. There are some good examples where qualification recognition is being resolved. The East African community has a number of programs about this. And honestly, recently with Ukraine, we've seen how quickly we can put in place systems when we want to have qualifications recognized and to be able to bring teachers in and have them be part of stabilizing the community that they have come with, right? And be part of that process. There are issues around looking at the need to recruit and train more female teachers. I don't think that's just in refugee settings. I think there's a lot of places where this is true, but in refugee settings, very often women make up a minority of the teaching workforce. And that's across kind of crisis and emergency settings as well. Increased female representation in teaching provides girls with female role models and helps change community attitudes. And so if we're talking about having teachers, at the heart of transformation, making it transformation that works for everyone is really critical. 2 quick final points. Predictable, reliable, and sustainable financing for teacher salaries and incentives really needs to be made available. I mean, I always end up coming back to the basics, you know, and a lot of the basics are around, if we want teachers not only to keep doing what they're doing, but also be at the forefront of transforming, like, let's pay them properly and on time. The reliance on humanitarian funding streams for so much of refugee education in particular means that it's difficult to have predictable multi-year financing. And again, at a basic level, it means it's difficult to give people more than a one-year contract. And so that leads to teacher absence, as you can imagine, and teacher attrition. And then all of the processes around stability and training and everything have to be restarted. And I just want to finish on a note around kind of global policy. This shift towards inclusion of refugees in national systems, teachers, students, everyone is so critical. And I think, you know, particularly for ministers of education here, I think it does make such an enormous difference to the future for refugee children and for their teachers. It's really the only way that we've found as UNHCR to be consistent and predictable and to provide the best quality of education. And I think when you were talking about the social contract, Percy, right at the start, you were reflecting on what it means in terms of promises made and promises kept. The Global Compact on Refugees was a global promise, right? And it's something that we have collectively made, we've collectively signed up to. And that's not just about providing equitable access to quality education for refugees, but it's also about sharing responsibility with host governments and not just kind of hoping for the best. It's really imperative, I think, that we collectively reflect on how we make good on those promises, how we include refugees, displaced populations, crisis-affected populations, as we move to transform education for all.
Thank you. Now, Haldis, floor is yours from a teacher association union perspective.
Thank you very much, Pasi. First, I must say my name is Haldis. I am also a qualified teacher from Norway. I have taught primary, secondary, and adult education. So although I bring with me the union perspective, being part of Education International, I keep reflecting from the classroom, from the teacher body that I think I still have. And it's not very often as a teacher, you're on a panel and you get the word as the last speaker and you sort of thinking, wow, all my speaking points are gone, that I'm on a panel where so many people have spoken about teachers in a way that speaks to me both as a unionist and as a classroom teacher. But you open, Pasi, by saying something about what does transformation mean? And so two reflections on that to begin with. First of all, transformation, you said, was something that was collaborative. And I think if we mean that transformation is going to be collaborative, we must make sure that the choices we take for the future make that possible. So I will say, when you ask what do we let go and what do we keep, we do not let go of the school, of the house, of the meeting place, the physical place where people can be together and the learning can be collaborative between the teacher, educator, and the student. What we do not throw away is the teacher. We cannot have collaborative learning through a machine. You all have laptops or phones in front of you. They're a tool, but they don't replace us as human beings. And to transform education, we must be very careful and not believe that one size fits all. We cannot transform the world from Paris, and we cannot transform the world from New York. That needs to be done at home. We can be inspired here. We can create a direction, but you need to go home and create real policy, like the minister from Argentina said, that is fit for purpose in your context. It was true what Eliza said, that teaching for many has been done in isolation. I started teaching in 1983, and I've done that as part of a team since 1983 with open classroom doors, very often actually outdoors in my country, but we moved the classroom outside. But don't assume that one narrative fits your narrative at home. Then I will say that to transform education, we do need a new deal for teachers, a new deal that comprises everything that has been said on this panel, that addresses all the unders that Eliza talked about to begin with. And I want to give you a short quote from our member organization in the Netherlands, because we had a research conducted by EI that was surveying our membership in 2021. We had 100 unions responding. The quote is, "The status expressed in words is getting better." This was during the pandemic. "Teachers are not losers anymore. They even get applause and praise for their creativity and adaptability. But it remains difficult to find people who want to be a teacher because the status is not met by reasonable workload or a decent salary." So I would say, keep on praising teachers, keep on applauding them, give them feedback, but be very aware that's not enough. That doesn't pay the bills. That doesn't really make feel that you're valuable as time goes on. Because what we see are high levels of attrition. 48% of respondents perceived that in their country, the profession was not attractive to young people. Now, one country that has been highlighted where it has been attractive is Finland over the years, and is asked, why do young people want to become teachers in Finland, but not in other countries? Now, the minister is more better placed than me to give that answer. But one of the answers we've often gotten is because society trusts teachers professionally. So when they praise, they mean it. And they don't micromanage them in the classroom. Poor salaries and working conditions, that has been mentioned several times. You know, we are human capital intensive. Any budget line on education is full of wages. So it's expensive to give us decent salaries. Precarious employment, short-term contracts do not retain teachers. Unmanageable workloads. This is where we really need to think about what do we keep and what do we throw away. And if I were speaking to politicians, I would say, you know, what kind of reporting increases learning among the students? And what kind of reporting is only bureaucracy and not really necessary? Because that's one of the non-teaching related workloads. Insufficient access to quality professional development has been mentioned here many times. How are you going to transform and be relevant if you don't give your teachers continuous professional development? There wasn't a computer at Teachers College when I was trained. No one talked about climate change, but you still have to address it today. You need professional development because you never stop learning, as Eliza said. Insufficient involvement of teachers in decision-making. Both the ministers have highlighted how important that is. The weak point of every reform and also transformation is implementation. And you will never implement if you don't have the people on the ground that know what they're supposed to do and actually believe in what they're supposed to do. So the new deal for teachers, guarantee labor rights and decent working conditions, invest in quality teacher training and professional development, trust, like Finland, and respect teachers and their pedagogical expertise. We used to say, stop at the stool gate. Don't try to meddle into what's happening in the classroom. That's the professional. Involve teacher unions in policy through social dialogue. They're representative, so you don't have to speak to every single teacher. Speak to a democratically representative organization. And invest in quality public education system and teachers. It doesn't come for free. And I would really also urge you to listen to what the minister from Argentina said, that if we really want to help the countries that need it most, the first thing they need is to have control over their own budgets. And that means to get rid of their debt and have the opportunity to raise financial means to cover education in a way where they are autonomous and independent and not dependent on the rest of the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I have a really quick kind of a parliament style round of questions for each of you, which means that you have about a minute or no more than two to respond this. I would like to start with Lee, and I think that there's a good bridge between what you were saying and referring to Finland. We often here in Finland, I'm sure that you have seen this much more than I have in back home. There are people asking this question that how do you build this trust in teachers, and how you can have a system that can do without this high-stake standardized testing and control and inspections and other things. Could you speak us a little bit, Lee, about the role of trust in teachers, and what does it mean for this conversation that we are having here when we are trying to build this new social contract?
Well, I think trust is hugely important, and in a way, I think it constitutes the current social contract in Finland when we look at the education and what it is founded on. And just as Halli said, we have the same analysis. We also think that one reason people have been, or the teachers' profession has been so attractive in Finland is because when we put trust in teachers, when we manage to build an education system where there is no school inspection and no standardized testing in primary education, it also signals to teachers that we trust their professionalism, and they get autonomy in their work. They feel that they have responsibility for assessment, for teaching methods, all of these issues that they can decide upon themselves. And of course, this is also something that increases attractiveness of the work that you do. But I think as a part of the social contract is also the fact that this requires a system where you can ensure that you have highly qualified and educated teachers. So a teacher's education system where teachers have master's degrees from class 1 upwards, and you have a research-based education for teachers, so that society also knows that everybody working in the schools do have the sufficient kind of professional skills for them to be trusted with this very important task.
Thank you very much. I understand that you need to
I do.
go and make a phone.
Sorry. Yes.
So there's another hot seat over there. So if you want to join us, thank you, Lee, for being here with us. Jaime, can I turn to you now and get back to this comprehensive social contract? During the pandemic that we are still working on, we witnessed what this report calls the displacement of education into domestic spaces. And so given the need for this new comprehensive social contract that you were talking about in your remarks, how do we make sure that education remains a public service and that it's strengthened, not weakened, strengthened as a common good?
Remain. Volviendo al comentario anterior, en nuestros países no pasó eso, que toda la educación se volvió a la casa. Por lo que decía antes, ¿no? La desigualdad es tan importante que sobre todo en los más pobres, donde no hay conectividad, donde no hay en los padres la posibilidad cultural de entre comillas, asumir ese rol de educador, lo que hubo es lo que conté antes, los más pobres quedaron sin educación. Entonces, no es que la educación fue al ámbito de lo privado. Volviendo a la división en cuartiles de nuestra sociedad, lo que demuestra nuestras evaluaciones es que en el cuartil 4 los más ricos, en el cuartil 3, en el cuartil 2 la clase media, mantuvieron sus posibilidades de aprendizaje. Los más pobres no lo tuvieron. Entonces lo que hace falta es una acción decisiva del Estado y de la sociedad para garantizar, para por un lado reparar aquello que no pudo hacerse en el tiempo que se tenía que hacer. Y por otro lado, ¿está bien, Carlos? ¿Sí? Para reparar aquello que no se pudo hacer en ese tiempo que no se pudo hacer. Pero al mismo tiempo pensar en ese nuevo contrato, en esa nueva escuela que tenemos la obligación de construir. Y ese es el desafío que tienen nuestras sociedades y nuestras comunidades. Tienen que hacer lo que en otras partes del mundo pasa en tiempos, en tiempos distintos, en diacronía. Las sociedades tan desiguales como la nuestra lo tienen que hacer en sincronía. Al mismo tiempo, esas dos tareas que muchas veces tienen tensiones, tienen contradicciones, tienen objetivos contrapuestos. Y esa es la dificultad, que al mismo tiempo es el desafío. La dificultad lo define, el desafío es la responsabilidad de hacer esa tarea.
So to respond to the question, in Argentina, there was no such a transition in times of COVID from the public space to the private one, to the private realm. There was no transition of education going into the households, because again, as was mentioned before, in many of the households there was no connectivity, and many of the households lacked the cultural capital for parents or family members to assume an educational role. So again, to reiterate the differences between the richest and the poorest quintiles in society, there was continuity in learning among the upper and the middle classes, but that was not the case with the poorest households, where students lacked, and therefore the measures that the state needs to do are decisive measures to actually repair those losses and those affectations that the COVID had amongst the poorest. So that is what a new social contract could do, is to actually repair these learning losses while in synchrony working towards catching up on the duties of education with the poorest. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Haldis, do you have a kind of a desire to speak more, or can I open this for the Q&A? I have a permission from this side, so okay. Let's do it this way, because we have about 20 minutes, 18 minutes time to have a conversation. Thank you very much for your contributions here, and now I'd like to give you a chance to join the conversation. If you have a question, please address it to any of the panel members, and you remember that the question always have two characteristics. One is that it ends with a question mark, and the second one is that it should be shorter than the answer. But other than that, you can feel free to be creative. But who would like to go first? Please use this opportunity now to say what I have to say, or any questions or comments you may have for these people. So, yes, sorry. Please introduce yourself as well, so we know who you are.
Hi, my name is Sushmina. I respond to Sushi as well. I am from Nepal, and I work at a youth network in Nepal called Youth Hive Nepal. I have 3 questions, and it's based on observation each. So I'm not sure if it might take a long time, but I promise you that it won't take more than 50 seconds. So my first observation is, and it's how the panel discussion is set up here, of how we are not in a stage and audience setting. It kind of feels like we're included. So based on this observation, my question is, when we talk about developing new social contracts and teachers, how do we dismantle the existing pedagogical learning into a rather engaging pedagogical one that embraces the vulnerability of the educators, while and not placing the teachers as the only heart of education? How do we devalue the hegemonic relationship that exists between teachers and students? That's my first question. My second question is, it's written here that a new social contract for education is act of reimagining means working together to create futures that are shared and interdependent. While we say this, the Minister of Education from Argentina also mentioned that it's important that comprehensive means including students, children, youth, families, and other sectors. But looking at this room, I do not see young people. I do not see children being in the conversation of when we talk about developing new social contracts. So how do we make sure that young people are in the core, not just in the form of implementation, but while we have this conversation here right now in this room, because I do not see anyone who's under 30. I might be assuming, but I don't see anyone who's under 30 except, okay, anyway. Good one. The third question that I have is the new proposal. The catalyst for a new social contract for education calls for a global solidarity and international cooperation, which means that it goes beyond North-South flows, and it means to strengthen the South-South relationship. How do we ensure, my question is, how do we ensure that we strengthen North-South, South-North relationship while we create this new contract for new social contract? And this observation is based by the, I'm sorry if I sound very rude, but by the distribution of how the panel discussion is. How do we include teachers, educators from the global South as well, while we have this conversation on social contract? Because I do not see anyone from global South. And I'm sorry if I'm being too rude and offensive. Those are my 3 questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. No, this is a free panel, so you can speak up. Thank you very much for those questions. Could you take the first one about the active learning, the pedagogies that she was asking, and then I'll leave these 2 other things for one of you to, or both of you to elaborate, please.
Thank you very much for very interesting questions. All of them could have had a long speech, but they're all very relevant. And I would say you're very right that we don't represent the global South sufficiently here. I must say there are some practical reasons like short notice, lack of visas, but you are right. And that is a collective responsibility. When it comes to also including students in their learning, I strongly believe in that, and Education International believes in that. It's important you're at venues like this, but I think it's most important in each and every school and classroom that young people can influence their own learning and their own education. And that can only be done for all if it's done where they are. So I think that's where you have to start, bottom up, making sure that it's not top down how you learn, but that you are part of it. When it comes to, again, existing pedagogies, it's not one existing pedagogy. There are many classrooms that are set up like this, that are interactive, that don't have a podium. So it's playing off the experiences of how can learning actually happen collaboratively. Then you need South-South, North-South, East-West cooperation. Is about identifying the good experiences, showcasing them and learning from them, because they do exist out there. although they may have to be further developed, like always.
Thank you. How this, Rebecca?
Thanks. No, I mean, I think they're all the right questions, right? And I think one of the questions more broadly is, how courageous are we prepared to be? When we're really talking about transforming education, you know, and by whom and for whom and along what lines, it's also allowing a lot of space for that, right? So, I mean, there was an amazing new curriculum in Kenya, like one of the most courageous curriculum shifts I've ever seen around competency-based curriculum. Teachers hate it, absolutely hate it, because they are very comfortable teaching how they teach, but they're also not supported, you know, or paid enough or to be delivering something else. So I think there are lots of places where we don't include lots of voices. I think in some ways, all of your questions are sort of linked a little bit to my mind. So it's kind of, how do we have the right people in the room, or how do we have everybody in the room in what needs to be a collective endeavor? And I think there are, you know, we're at a time, hopefully in human history, where we're prepared to have those uncomfortable conversations. You know, we're talking recently about tertiary scholarships for refugees, and we're talking about, you know, if we want to decolonize academia, then actually that does mean being prepared to have other people in academia, which sounds really obvious, right? But actually, for some reason, it was incredibly challenging as a statement. And it's true. I work for the UN. We talk about localization, and we're happy talking about localization. We're happy talking about decolonizing the UN, as long as it doesn't mean that I lose my job. And I think, you know, like living with that discomfort and living with those difficult conversations, I think is probably central to everything you're saying.
Thank you. Minister.
Sí. The second question, la segunda pregunta, que más que una pregunta es un comentario muy importante, porque estamos acostumbrados a que los jóvenes sean sujetos de nuestro discurso, pero son objetos de las discusiones, no son sujetos de las discusiones. Estamos acostumbrados a hablar de los jóvenes y a describirlos como sujetos de la transformación, pero en la práctica real, en la práctica de la política educativa y muchas veces en la práctica institucional, son objetos de decisiones que tomamos los adultos. Entonces, no hay proceso de transformación, no hay proceso de mejora de la escuela de los jóvenes, si no es con los jóvenes como protagonistas. En una institución que conducen los adultos, que conducen los profesores. Y eso requiere una nueva formación, ese es el nuevo contrato, eso requiere toda una nueva conformación de la política educativa y de las instituciones escolares. Es los jóvenes como protagonistas de la transformación de una escuela que la conducen los adultos. Y eso requiere una nueva realidad para los trabajadores de la educación, para los docentes, pero también para los jóvenes.
So concerning the second question, the issue of the inclusion of youth, which is more of a comment than a question, the minister has highlighted how youth tends to be more of a subject than an actor of their own accord. They're more subjected to the decisions that we make, that adults make, and they are subject of the transformations that we as adults envision, and that indeed more inclusion of youth in education policies, more inclusion of youth as to what they want to study, requires new policies, requires new educational institutions, ones that have youth at the center of them.
Y eso va de la mano de respetar las tradiciones que tiene cada país. Hay países que tienen comités de participación, comisiones, están institucionalizados. En nuestro país hay centros de estudiantes, consejos de convivencia. pero esa participación, ese protagonismo tiene que estar institucionalizado. Gracias, Carlos.
Thank you, Minister. So an additional point is that in respect of culture and traditions of different geographies, the institutionalization of different agencies or councils for youth and for students are important so that they can have an institutional representation and a voice at the table. Thank you.
Thank you. We have time for one more reaction, question, comments. Anyone here? Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Honorable Mr. Chairperson. I'm Leila, Minister of Education from Zanzibar, Tanzania. I just like to add some of the input concerning or the discussion here concerning the space of teaching in the community and how we are valued by the society. So within the new contract here, I have gone through the proposal of the renewing education. As the previous presenters, they insisted that teachers' incentives, recognition and appreciation is very, very, very crucial in whatever reform that we are going to take place. I have an experience. We did a very simple research in 10 schools, just a simple survey. We go in a classroom, 57 students, we ask what you want to be in the future, what profession you prefer. There's no single student choosing teaching. So there's message here on how teachers are seen in the society. And it is a lot to do with their social and economic status in the society. Because children see that maybe if you're a banker, if you're a doctor, if you're a lawyer, you're living some life different from teachers. With this digitalized world, everything in our hands, so kids, they search the prominent, maybe the privileged people are not teachers among those privileged people in the society. So they choose other profession instead of teaching. And bad enough, all we are here, we are parents, we have kids. At the end, we want them to graduate from university, from secondary school, and we want a very competent teachers in the school. But the way we are treated them, teachers, seriously is unacceptable. So any transformation that we're going to decide, teachers should be a center in terms of its income, incentives, allowances, recognition, appreciation, being highly ranked in the society as a one among the professions that need to be recognized. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very important notion. Rather than ending this conversation here, I just want to check from the panel. Anybody wants to bring the final word? Anyone? No? Go ahead.
No, I think that we had a very good intervention at the end there to praise it, and that we have to remember that words are not enough in the long run, because it's about the young people. Sure. It's about recruiting for the future, everything from them influencing their education as of they enter school, whether it's 4 or 5 or younger than that, up until they choose their vocation. All won't be teachers, but we need some to become teachers. So thank you for that.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me thank the panel, half of the panel that is still remaining here, and thank you all for coming, particularly the comments and reactions that you made, and everything is so true. So I wish you the wonderful evening and the rest of the summit, and thanks for coming here once again. Thank you.